Ma'am, you need to put your headphones away now.
Oh, sorry, what's going on?
Just a precaution. Thank you for your cooperation.
Okay.
The flight attendant walked past her seat for the sixth time, serving champagne to every passenger except the 17-year-old black girl sitting in first class. She asked politely for water and was told to wait her turn. She pressed the call button and was ignored completely. What the crew didn't know was that her father, the founder and CEO of the airline, was sitting in the business class cabin, testing his company's service standards after receiving complaints about discriminatory treatment in exactly 14 minutes. He would walk into first class, witness the mistreatment of his own daughter, and make a decision so devastating it would ground 3 aircraft, terminate an entire crew, and send shockwaves through the aviation industry that are still felt today. If you're ready to watch prejudice meet consequences in the most spectacular way possible, hit that like button immediately and subscribe to Echo Story, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith that accountability is real. Justice can be swift, and sometimes karma wears a 3-piece suit and controls your paycheck. 17-year-old Jordan Matthews sat in seat 2A of Pacific Sky Airlines flight 405 from Los Angeles to New York, her physics textbook open on the tray table, but her eyes unable to focus on the equations. She was traveling alone for the first time to visit MIT, where she had been accepted for early admission with a full scholarship for aerospace engineering. Her father, Marcus Matthews, the self-made billionaire who had built Pacific Sky from a regional carrier into America's 5th largest airline, had insisted she fly first class despite her protests that business class was perfectly fine. Jordan was used to luxury but uncomfortable with its trappings, preferring to blend in rather than stand out. She wore comfortable jeans, a simple MIT hoodie her father had bought her as a congratulations gift, and white sneakers. Her natural hair was styled in twists pulled back with a headband. She looked like what she was, a brilliant teenager excited about her future. Not someone who belonged in first class, according to the assumptions of the crew serving Cabin A that morning. The lead flight attendant was Carolyn Reed, a 15-year veteran of Pacific Sky, who had developed what she considered an expert ability to identify passengers who didn't belong in premium cabins. Carolyn had seen too many cases of people scamming upgrades, using stolen credit cards to book expensive tickets, or taking advantage of status matches they didn't deserve. She prided herself on maintaining the exclusivity of first class, ensuring that the real premium passengers received the service they deserved without being diluted by interlopers. When Jordan had boarded with the first wave of passengers, Carolyn had immediately flagged her as suspicious. Too young, too casual, probably traveling on her parents' miles or some kind of charity ticket. Carolyn decided that while she couldn't refuse Jordan the seat itself, she could make it clear through her service that some passengers were more valued than others. It was a subtle art she had perfected over the years, the strategic ignoring, the delayed responses, the slight tone of condescension that kept presumptuous passengers in their psychological place. As the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, Carolyn began the first-class beverage service with the efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. She worked from front to back, her smile bright and genuine as she greeted each passenger by name after checking their profiles in the system. The businessman in seat 1A received his usual Bloody Mary without having to ask. The elderly couple in row 3 got their champagne with a warm comment about their anniversary trip to New York. The tech executive in 4B was addressed by his elite status tier with appropriate deference. Carolyn moved through the cabin with grace and professionalism, her voice a practiced instrument of hospitality. And then she reached row 2 where Jordan sat, and something shifted. Carolyn's eyes passed over Jordan as though the seat were empty, her body language communicating complete dismissal. She continued to the passengers in row 5 without breaking stride, never acknowledging that Jordan had even pressed her call button twice during the service. The exclusion was so deliberate that the passenger across the aisle noticed and frowned. Jordan felt the familiar sensation of being made invisible, a feeling she had experienced too many times in her young life despite her family's wealth and her father's prominence. She told herself to stay calm, that maybe there was a legitimate reason for being skipped, though she knew in her gut exactly what was happening. Her father had taught her to always assume good intentions first and only conclude discrimination when the pattern became undeniable. Well, being passed over 6 times while every other passenger received service qualified as undeniable. Jordan pressed the call button again, watching as the chime sounded clearly through the cabin. Carolyn was at the galley, just 10 feet away, preparing hot towels for the passengers. She glanced at the call panel, saw that it was from seat 2A, and visibly rolled her eyes before turning her back to continue working. The passenger in 1A, a layer named Patricia Simmons, witnessed this and felt her professional instincts activate. She had litigated enough discrimination cases to recognize deliberate exclusion when she saw it. Patricia made a mental note to remember every detail of what was happening. 20 minutes into the flight, Jordan's thirst had become uncomfortable. She had been too nervous about the MIT visit to eat or drink much that morning, and the dry cabin air was making her throat scratchy. She unbuckled and walked to the galley, where Carolyn was arranging items on a service cart with another flight attendant named Brian. "Excuse me," Jordan said politely, her voice quiet but clear. "I've pressed my call button several times. Could I please get a bottle of water?" Carolyn turned slowly, her expression a careful mask of professional patience that didn't quite hide her annoyance. "Sweetie, we're preparing the meal service right now. If you'll return to your seat, we'll get to everyone in order." The word "sweetie" was delivered with just enough condescension to sting. Brian looked uncomfortable but said nothing, his eyes flickering between Carolyn and Jordan. "I understand," Jordan replied, maintaining her composure despite feeling her face heat up. "But I've been waiting for 30 minutes while you've served every other passenger. I just need water, nothing complicated." Carolyn's smile tightened into something sharp. "Miss, I said we'll get to you. First class is about patience and understanding proper etiquette. Now, please return to your seat before I have to call the captain about disruptive behavior." Jordan stood frozen for a moment, processing the threat implicit in Carolyn's words. Disruptive behavior. For asking for water. For politely pointing out that she had been ignored for half an hour while everyone around her received full service. She felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She would not give Carolyn the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Jordan returned to her seat, her physics book now forgotten as she stared out the window at the clouds below. Patricia Simmons in 1A had heard the entire exchange. She pulled out her phone and began typing notes, documenting times, direct quotes, and her observations. Patricia had a feeling this situation was going to escalate, and she wanted a contemporaneous record of what she was witnessing. What neither Carolyn nor Jordan knew was that Marcus Matthews was seated in business class, deliberately traveling outside of first class to observe service standards anonymously. He had received increasing complaints about discriminatory treatment on his airline and had decided to conduct personal spot checks on various flights. He couldn't see into the first-class cabin from his position, but he would be walking through during the flight. The meal service began 45 minutes into the flight, with Carolyn and Brian wheeling the cart through first class with their rehearsed efficiency. Each passenger was offered a choice of entrees with detailed descriptions of the ingredients and preparation. Carolyn's voice maintained its warm, professional tone as she served rows 1, 3, 4, and 5. When she reached row 2, something remarkable happened. She simply wheeled the cart past Jordan's seat without stopping, without speaking, without acknowledging her presence in any way. It was such a blatant omission that every passenger who witnessed it felt the awkwardness settle over the cabin, like fog. Brian, pushing the cart from behind, glanced at Jordan and opened his mouth as if to say something, but Carolyn shot him a look that silenced him immediately. They continued to the remaining rows while Jordan sat in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap, trying to maintain her dignity while being subjected to treatment that was clearly intended to humiliate and exclude her. The businessman in 4B, a middle-aged white man named Robert Chun, finally spoke up. "Excuse me, I think you skipped this young lady's row." "She hasn't been served yet." Carolyn turned with a practiced smile. We're serving according to our service sequence, sir. Everyone will receive their meal. But she made no move to return to Jordan's row. Patricia Simmons had seen enough. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, her lawyer's instincts fully engaged now. "Miss Reed," she said, reading Carolyn's name tag with deliberate emphasis, "I am an attorney and I have been documenting your treatment of this passenger for the past hour. You have deliberately ignored her call button 6 times, refused her a simple request for water, threatened her with being reported for disruptive behavior when she politely followed up, and now you have explicitly skipped her during meal service, while serving every other passenger in this cabin. I want you to know that I am recording this incident in detail and will be filing a formal complaint the moment we land." The cabin went completely silent. Carolyn's face drained of color as she realized that her actions had been observed and documented by someone with the expertise to recognize the legal implications. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think you saw, but I'm following standard service protocols." Patricia's voice was ice cold. "What I saw was textbook discrimination. Service this young woman immediately, or I will personally walk to the cockpit and inform the captain that you are creating a hostile environment that may constitute a violation of federal civil rights laws." The threat of captain involvement seemed to penetrate Carolyn's defenses. She turned to Jordan with a smile so fake it bordered on grotesque. "What would you like from the menu, miss?" Jordan looked at the meal options, her appetite completely gone, but determined not to let Carolyn win by refusing service. "The salmon, please." Carolyn served her with mechanical efficiency, her movements stiff and resentful, before wheeling the cart away without the warm farewell she had given every other passenger. Jordan picked at her food, each bite difficult to swallow past the lump of humiliation in her throat. She was angry at Carolyn, angry at Brian for his complicit silence, but mostly angry at herself for letting the situation affect her so deeply. Her father had always told her that she would face prejudice throughout her life. That being black and successful meant constantly proving herself to people who had already decided she didn't belong. He had taught her to document everything, to stay calm, to fight with facts rather than emotion. Jordan pulled out her phone and began writing her own account of the flight, noting times, quotes, and witness names. She didn't know yet that her father would soon have access to far more detailed documentation than even she could provide. Pacific Sky's first-class cabins were all equipped with security cameras for safety purposes, and every word spoken in the cabin was being recorded. Marcus Matthews chose the midpoint of the flight to conduct his walkthrough of first class, a standard practice that CEOs sometimes perform to observe service quality firsthand. He moved from business class through the galley, greeting the crew with professional courtesy but not identifying himself. He entered the first-class cabin with the stated purpose of using the forward lavatory, but his eyes were constantly scanning, observing the passenger interactions and service standards. What he saw made his blood pressure spike. In seat 2 sat a young black woman who looked achingly familiar even from behind. As he walked closer, Marcus realized with dawning horror that he was looking at his own daughter. Jordan was supposed to be in seat 2A of first class, exactly where he saw her sitting, but he had been traveling separately at her request because she wanted to practice independence. The question was, why did she look so unhappy, her meal barely touched, her posture suggesting someone who was trying to make herself invisible? Marcus's executive instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. He approached Jordan's row and leaned down. "Excuse me, miss, is everything all right? How's the service been treating you?" Jordan looked up and her eyes widened in shock. "Dad? What are you doing here?" The recognition brought instant clarity to Marcus. His daughter, his brilliant, kind, accomplished daughter, who had earned her place at MIT through pure merit, was sitting in first class on his airline looking like she wanted to disappear. He slid into the empty seat beside her, his jaw tight. "Jordan, tell me what happened, and I want every detail." Jordan hesitated, not wanting to cause trouble, but the emotion of the past 2 hours overwhelmed her professional composure. The words spilled out, the ignored call buttons, Carolyn's condescension, the threat about disruptive behavior, being skipped during meal service. Patricia Simmons having to advocate for her before she received even basic service, as Jordan talked. Marcus's expression shifted from concern to fury, so cold it was almost physically tangible. When she finished, he stood up and walked deliberately to the galley where Carolyn was preparing coffee service. "Miss Reed, my name is Marcus Matthews. I'm the CEO of Pacific Sky Airlines. I'd like you to explain to me why my daughter, who is sitting in seat 2A with a fully paid first-class ticket, has been systematically ignored and mistreated for the entire flight." The color drained from Carolyn's face so completely she looked like she might faint. Brian, standing beside her, took an involuntary step backward. The galley suddenly felt very small. Carolyn's mouth opened and closed several times before words emerged, each excuse weaker than the last. "Mr. Matthews, I had no idea that was your daughter. If I had known, I would have provided excellent service. This is all a misunderstanding." Marcus's voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. "So you're saying you only provide excellent service to passengers when you know they're related to executives? That your baseline service standard involves ignoring call buttons, denying water, and skipping passengers during meal service?" Carolyn tried again. "Sir, there was a service sequence issue. We were training a new routine," and Marcus held up his hand. "Stop. Don't insult my intelligence with transparent lies. I'm going to tell you what happened because I've already reviewed the cabin camera footage on my phone while my daughter was telling me her story." He held up his device showing the airline's internal security feed that CEOs had access to for safety and quality control purposes. "I watched you serve every passenger except her. I watched you ignore 6 call button alerts. I watched you threaten a teenager with being reported for asking for water. And I watched Patricia Simmons have to threaten legal action before you provided my daughter the basic service that every other passenger received without question." He paused, his next words measured and final. "You're terminated, effective immediately." Carolyn's shock turned to desperate pleading. "Mr. Matthews, please, I've been with this airline for 15 years. I have a mortgage, a family. This is my career. I didn't mean any harm, I just thought—" Marcus cut her off. "You thought what, exactly? That a black teenager in casual clothes couldn't possibly belong in first class? That she must have scammed her way into that seat? That she deserved to be put in her place through deliberate mistreatment?" The accuracy of his assessment hit Carolyn like a physical blow. "I'm sorry. I'll apologize to her. Please don't do this." Marcus turned to Brian. "And you? You witnessed every bit of her discrimination and said nothing. You could have served my daughter yourself when you saw what was happening. Instead, you became complicit through your silence. You're terminated as well." Brian's eyes widened. "But I didn't do anything." Marcus's response was cold. "Exactly. In situations of discrimination, silence is complicity. This airline has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, and that includes failing to intervene when you witness it." He pulled out his phone and made a call to flight operations. "This is Matthews. I need you to immediately dispatch replacement crew to meet Flight 405. When we land at JFK, the entire first-class crew is being removed from duty pending investigation." "Yes, I said the entire crew. This is a CEO directive." He ended the call and looked at the 2 shocked flight attendants. "You'll work the remainder of this flight, but under my direct observation, and you'll do it correctly. For the remaining 3 hours of the flight, Marcus sat in first class, visible and vigilant, while Carolyn and Brian performed their duties with robotic precision. Every passenger received impeccable service, but the joy and warmth that had characterized Carolyn's interactions with preferred passengers was gone, replaced by fearful compliance. Jordan sat quietly, processing the fact that her father had not only witnessed her mistreatment, but had taken immediate and devastating action against those responsible. She felt vindicated but also strangely sad. She hadn't wanted to ruin anyone's career. She had just wanted to be treated with basic dignity. Patricia Simmons introduced herself properly to Jordan and Marcus, explaining her profession and offering her detailed notes as documentation for any proceedings that might follow. Marcus thanked her profusely and asked for her contact information. explaining that Pacific Sky would likely want to interview her as part of their investigation. Other passengers approached Jordan to express their support and disgust at what they had witnessed, several sharing their own stories of discriminatory treatment while traveling. The sense of solidarity helped Jordan feel less alone, though the emotional toll of the experience still weighed heavily on her. When Flight 405 landed at JFK 3 hours later, a team of corporate investigators and replacement crew members were waiting at the gate. Marcus deplaned first with Jordan, ensuring she was settled in the airline's premium lounge with food and comfort before he returned to address the situation. Carolyn and Brian were escorted to a private room where they provided statements to investigators, while security reviewed all cabin footage. The interviews revealed a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond this single flight. Other crew members came forward with stories of Carolyn's discriminatory service practices, her comments about passengers who didn't look like they belonged in premium cabins, and her habit of providing substandard service to people she deemed unworthy. Brian's personnel file showed multiple incidents where he had witnessed questionable behavior by colleagues but failed to report it. The investigation expanded to include a review of passenger complaints over the past 2 years, revealing dozens of reports about discriminatory treatment that had been inadequately addressed by middle management. Marcus realized this wasn't just about 2 bad employees. It was about a systemic failure to take discrimination seriously. He made the decision to ground all 3 aircraft that Carolyn had worked on that week and conduct emergency anti-discrimination training for every crew member who had flown with her. The story broke in the media within 24 hours, with headlines focusing on the CEO who had witnessed discrimination against his own daughter and taken immediate action. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from praise for Marcus's decisive response to criticism that he only cared about discrimination when it affected his own family. Marcus addressed those concerns in a press conference 2 days later, speaking with raw honesty about his failures as a CEO to create a culture where discriminatory behavior was truly unacceptable. My daughter should never have been treated that way on my airline or any airline. But neither should the thousands of other passengers who have experienced similar treatment and didn't have a CEO for a parent. This incident opened my eyes to how inadequate our response has been to discrimination complaints. We claim to have zero tolerance, but our actions haven't matched our words. That changes now. He announced a comprehensive overhaul of Pacific Sky's service culture, including mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, body cameras for crew members to document interactions, a passenger advocacy board with authority to review complaints and recommend terminations, and significant financial bonuses for employees who reported discriminatory behavior by colleagues. The changes were radical and expensive, but Marcus made clear that cost was irrelevant when the airline's integrity was at stake. Carolyn Reed's termination was upheld after a thorough investigation, with additional findings that she had engaged in discriminatory service patterns for years. She attempted to sue for wrongful termination, but the combination of documented evidence, witness testimony, and her own admission during the investigation that she had made assumptions about Jordan based on her appearance doomed her case. The lawsuit was dismissed and Carolyn found herself unemployable in the aviation industry, her reputation destroyed by her own actions. She eventually found work in retail but struggled with the significant pay cut and loss of status. Brian faced similar consequences, with his termination upheld based on his failure to intervene or report obvious discrimination. The message sent throughout the airline industry was clear. Discrimination would be met with immediate and career-ending consequences, and silence in the face of discrimination was equally unacceptable. Other airlines began implementing similar reforms, not out of moral conviction but out of fear that they could be the next company featured in headlines about mistreating passengers. The Jordan Matthews incident became a watershed moment for aviation service culture, studied in business schools as an example of how leadership response to discrimination can transform an entire industry. Jordan Matthews went on to MIT, where she excelled in aerospace engineering, eventually graduating at the top of her class with multiple patents for fuel efficiency innovations. She joined Pacific Sky's engineering division after graduation, not because of her father, but because she wanted to improve the systems that had failed her and countless others. Jordan became an advocate for diverse hiring in aviation, speaking at conferences about her experience and the importance of creating cultures where everyone truly belonged. She never forgot that flight on Pacific Sky 405, but she transformed the pain of that experience into purpose. Years later, when she was designing Pacific Sky's next generation of aircraft, Jordan insisted that the first-class cabin specifications include service standards that were built into the physical design, making it impossible to skip passengers or provide differential treatment. Her innovations made discrimination mechanically difficult, forcing equality through engineering. It was her way of ensuring that what happened to her could never happen to anyone else, that the humiliation she endured would result in lasting, systemic change rather than just temporary reforms that faded once the publicity died down. Dacus Matthews's leadership during the crisis elevated his reputation from successful businessman to moral leader within the industry. His willingness to take personal responsibility for failures in his company's culture, to implement expensive reforms without being forced by lawsuits or regulations, and to hold himself accountable for creating systems that had allowed discrimination to flourish set a new standard for corporate leadership. Pacific Sky's customer satisfaction ratings soared as passengers recognized they were flying with an airline that genuinely valued treating everyone with dignity. The financial impact was significant, with premium bookings from diverse passengers increasing by 43% over the next 2 years as word spread that Pacific Sky was serious about inclusive service. Marcus appeared before Congress to advocate for federal regulations, requiring airlines to implement anti-discrimination measures similar to those he had adopted voluntarily. His testimony was powerful, using data from his own airline to show that treating passengers equally wasn't just morally right but also financially beneficial. The reforms he pioneered eventually became industry standards, changing how millions of passengers experienced air travel and proving that one moment of witnessed injustice could catalyze transformation far beyond a single flight or a single airline. Today, the story of Jordan Matthews and Flight 405 is taught in aviation service training programs as the defining moment when the industry finally confronted its systemic discrimination problem. New flight attendants learn about Carolyn Reed not to mock her but to understand how unconscious bias can destroy careers and harm passengers when left unchecked. They learn about Brian's complicit silence and the moral obligation to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. Most importantly, they learn about Jordan's dignity in the face of mistreatment and Patricia Simmons's courage to intervene when she witnessed injustice against a stranger. The incident sparked a broader conversation about who belongs in premium spaces and the assumptions people make about worthiness based on appearance. Jordan went on to become one of the youngest vice presidents in Pacific Sky's history, eventually succeeding her father as CEO when he retired. Under her leadership, the airline became known not just for its service standards but for its commitment to genuine equality, proving that diversity in leadership produces better outcomes for everyone. Carolyn Reed's name became synonymous with the old guard of discrimination that the industry left behind, while Jordan Matthews' name represented the future. This story, shared with you on Echo Story, reminds us that how we treat others when we think no one important is watching reveals our true character, and that accountability can come from the most unexpected sources when we least expect it.